Hi, welcome to Ms. Cooper's art class. Today I'm teaching you how to do a grid method for drawing that is very easy and doesn't require a whole lot of measuring or math to be able to do. So this will allow you to easily transfer an image from a printed image to your own drawing. Now I'm working on a 4x3 printed image and I'm moving it onto 8x6 paper because they are the same ratio, so my image does not get distorted. Now I'm grabbing a ruler and a colored pencil so I can see it on my image, but I also have a regular graphite pencil to work with too. Your first step is to make an X going across your whole image, so no measuring needed here, just a nice straight edge. So what I'm doing is going from corner to corner and using a colored pencil to mark it out because that's easier to see on my printed image. So step one, pretty easy, just drawing a little X across it. So then your next step is to make a plus going through the middle. Now you already have a center point, but you want to make sure that your lines don't go off on diagonals when they go through the center. So what you'll see me doing here is measuring my image. It's 3 inches wide, so I'm going to measure halfway through and make a little dot at 1.5 inches. On my 4-inch side, I'm going to put a dot at 2 inches. That way I've marked out my halfway points. I've seen people do it without marking off their halfway lines, but sometimes that puts your lines on diagonals. But this is really the only measuring you have to do during this process. So once you've measured halfway down each of those sides, you can connect those dots you made at the edges. They're kind of hard to see on mine because I made them rather small. But once you connect them, you will have a nice straight line going through your image. Again, I'm using that white colored pencil so I can see it in a nice straight edge. You'll know you're doing this properly if that line goes directly through that point in the middle of your X. If it's not quite lined up, it either means your X isn't quite right or maybe you didn't measure halfway down the sides properly. But it is worth making sure that all your lines line up really well. So your next step is to do a diamond or a rhombus kind of shape. Now the important thing here is to go all the way to the edges of your image, which are at the ends of the plus here. So make sure you go all the way to the ends of your plus and connect them with your ruler. So right now I'm doing the top and the right arms of the plus and I am connecting them at the very ends to draw a little X across the existing line with my colored pencil and my ruler. Now you're going to do this in 4 spots because you have a couple different lines to connect at the end of your plus. You can kind of think of it like a kite where you're drawing a diamond around that plus in the middle. So you're almost there. You have a lot of triangles on your grid, but there's one more step to make your grid just a little bit finer so you have more reference points to work with when you're transferring your image. You're going to draw a tic-tac-toe box across your image. If you look in the middle of each X, you can look at those center points and connect them. So no measuring required here. Just look across those center points and connect those. And then you will end up with a nice grid of triangles to use as a map for your image. So what you'll see me doing next is you'll see me showing how to use that grid to transfer your image. So what I'm going to do to transfer it finally is I'm going to take my nice piece of paper and very lightly draw that same grid in pencil. This way I can still go back and erase it later instead of colored pencil, which I would not be able to erase. So I did an X, a plus, and a diamond, and then I'm going to do that tic-tac-toe board. I'm drawing the same grid because then it means that everything will be very easy to transfer properly and I'll have a nice map to my image. So you can see my original printed image and my blank piece of paper side by side, and this is me breaking down how I used that grid to map out my image. So I'm going to zoom in here in a second, and I'm going to kind of work with this dog's nose. She's kind of an awkward dog, and I chose this because she has an interesting position, but I gridded it to make sure that everything's proportional so she still looks like a dog when I'm finished. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the top triangle, it's just to the right of the center that has her nose in it, and I'm going to make sure that I'm lining up her nose in the same way as the middle. So I'm looking at where her nose intersects or comes very close to the lines of my grid on the original image on the left, and then making sure it matches on the right. This is kind of an odd area of her face because the slants are kind of going everywhere to connect her nose. So I'm getting a rough outline in, and I'll refine it a little bit later. But what I'm doing is I'm just kind of taking those dots and doing a little connect the dots with it, but with a lot more curved lines in a little more of a roundabout way. This nose isn't perfect, but it does give me something to work with for when I'm moving on to the actual drawing and I'm shading it in and adding those values. So you can connect the dots, but what you see me doing here is kind of going off into space and drawing the line because I felt pretty confident that it would intersect in the correct spot, which it almost does. I would refine it just a little bit because I kind of cut off a little bit of the squiggle. But I tend to kind of hop around and kind of go to different areas of my image while I'm working, so I'm actually skipping that next triangle and just moving on to where her paw is because I think that's a little more exciting right now. So right now I'm kind of starting by connecting a dot to the line where her harness and her arm, shoulder, whatever that is on her, is starting to intersect it. The paw fits very neatly inside this triangular area, which is kind of nice for drawing, so that's why I chose to kind of skip ahead to that part before moving on to other parts of the drawing. Her paw's a little bit thin, and so you can see me doubling back and changing my lines a little bit as I go. And I would probably move it just a little bit more when I'm doing the actual drawing. But again, this is just to get the outline and make sure things are more or less in proportion. So now with her head, I'm again using that grid to map out where her head should go and making sure all my slants are going to the right spot. Making sure that little sliver of her head is still in that triangle that I'm drawing right now. And then moving down to her ear. Now when it came to her eye, I wasn't absolutely positive it was in the right spot, so what I did was I took the grid and I made it a little bit smaller. In that one area I added another X and another plus. I didn't use a ruler, I probably should have, but the rough gridding was enough to tell me that I did have her eye in the right spot, so I felt really good moving on to the rest of the drawing. So I really sped up this part because I think you get the idea with using your grid as a map. So you can see me just kind of putting in this rough outline. I didn't put everything in the grid at first, I still kind of refined a little bit later, but this was mostly to get the things in proportion. So instead of looking at her like one whole dog, I just kind of broke her into the little lines and shapes that make her up because I can kind of look at her more holistically later. After that, I erased the grid lines. You want to do that so you don't have your grid lines in your final drawing, and you don't really need them when you start adding your values all that much because you already have your outline there. You could always mark off one or two values if you needed to, like I'm doing here, just to make sure they end up in the right spot, but you don't need to go into detail. So what I'm showing you here is just kind of a reminder that you should make sure your paper has the same ratio as the original image, because if you put her on a square, for example, it would stretch her out. And she is a very wide dog, but she's not that wide. So I made sure I used the right 4:3 and then 8:6 ratio. So anyway, I would have continued the drawing from here. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like or subscribe or comment if this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching.